The second organ of elimination are your lungs, and your lungs need fresh air. And we go to great lengths here at Living Springs to make sure you've got fresh air. Your lungs also need the exercise. Exercise increases your lung capacity. Right now you're breathing in 500 ml and you're breathing out 500 ml. When you walk up one of those hills out there fast, and you start breathing very deeply, you're breathing in 3,600 ml and you're breathing out 3,600 ml.
If you think your daily habits are harmless, think again. Almost 70% of respiratory diseases can be traced back to what you're doing every single day. In this video, you'll discover the silent killers that are slowly destroying your lungs and health, and you are just letting them without resisting. From the air you breathe to the habits you've never questioned, Barbara O'Neill uncovers the dangerous choices putting your health at risk. These hidden threats could mean the difference between thriving and struggling with chronic respiratory problems. Ready to open your eyes? Let's get started. Barbara O'Neill explains that smoking and vaping introduce harmful substances into the lungs, which significantly affect respiratory health. Cigarette smoke contains over 7,000 chemicals, many of which are known carcinogens and irritants that cause severe damage to the lungs. These toxic chemicals impair the function of cilia, tiny hair-like structures in the respiratory tract responsible for clearing mucus and debris. When cilia are damaged, it leads to mucus buildup and makes the lungs more vulnerable to infections and diseases. This is a key factor in the development of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, where airflow is obstructed, making breathing increasingly difficult over time. The damage extends beyond the cilia.
4,000 chemicals in one cigarette. We had a lady last program, just last week. She was coming off 30 cigarettes. No, she was coming off a packet of cigarettes a day for 30 years. And it was the first time she'd stopped. At the end of the week, she said, "I can't believe I'm not suffering more." "Why aren't I suffering more?" I said, "Well, you've done a couple of days on juices, you're having a steam sauna every afternoon, diving into the mountain stream, back into the steam bath, you're sweating out a lot of the poisons. And when you sweat out those poisons, they're not in your body for your body to have to withdraw from as much." She was excited. She said, "I just watched my mother die from lung cancer and I made her a promise on her deathbed that I would stop smoking." I said to her, "How do you think you'll go?" She said, "Well, I'm going to give it my best shot." I said, "Great." That's good. It's nasty stuff. Many die from not only the lung diseases, but many associated diseases that can be linked with tobacco.
Chemicals like tar and formaldehyde in cigarette smoke cause inflammation in the airways, leading to chronic bronchitis. This inflammation narrows the bronchial tubes, restricting airflow and causing symptoms such as persistent coughing and wheezing. Long-term exposure to these substances can also initiate abnormal cell growth in lung tissue, significantly raising the risk of lung cancer. The toxic impact reaches every part of the respiratory system, causing irreversible harm to lung tissue and weakening the body's natural defenses. Vaping, while often marketed as a safer alternative, is not free from risks. E-cigarette aerosol contains harmful substances like nicotine, diacetyl, and heavy metals such as lead. These chemicals can cause inflammation and irritation of the lungs and airways, just like cigarette smoke. Nicotine, in particular, is highly addictive and can worsen asthma symptoms by causing bronchial spasms, making breathing more difficult. The flavoring agents used in e-liquids are also problematic, as they contain substances that, when inhaled, may lead to lung injury or conditions like popcorn lung, a form of bronchiolitis obliterans. But the problem is, people don't care about the poor indoor air quality as much as they care about smoking, while poor air quality also significantly affects respiratory health. Pollutants commonly found indoors can harm the body, especially the respiratory system. Mold is a frequent culprit in indoor air contamination, thriving in damp environments like bathrooms, basements, or anywhere moisture accumulates. When mold spores are inhaled, they can trigger allergic reactions, cause asthma attacks, or irritate the airways, making breathing difficult. The respiratory system can be highly sensitive to these spores, and even low levels of exposure can cause symptoms like sneezing, coughing, or wheezing in people prone to allergies or respiratory issues. Dust mites, another indoor pollutant, thrive in bedding, upholstery, and carpets. These microscopic insects produce waste particles that can easily become airborne and inhaled. Exposure to dust mites often triggers allergic reactions such as sneezing, runny nose, and itchy eyes, and may also exacerbate asthma symptoms. Since they are invisible to the naked eye, dust mites can be challenging to control, leading to persistent exposure and recurring health problems. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which are chemicals emitted from many household products, are also highlighted by Barbara O'Neill as significant contributors to poor indoor air quality. VOCs are found in cleaning agents, air fresheners, paints, and even some furniture. These chemicals release gases that can irritate the respiratory system when inhaled. Short-term exposure can cause symptoms like throat irritation, headaches, or dizziness, while long-term exposure increases the risk of chronic respiratory conditions and even affects overall lung function. According to Barbara O'Neill, continuous exposure to these indoor pollutants can lead to the development or worsening of respiratory conditions, and even those without existing conditions may begin experiencing symptoms over time. Plus, if you lead a sedentary lifestyle, it has a significant impact on lung health. Without regular physical activity, the muscles that play a key role in breathing become weak. These muscles, particularly the diaphragm and intercostal muscles between the ribs, are crucial for proper lung function, allowing the lungs to expand and contract effectively. When they aren't engaged regularly, their strength and endurance decline, making it harder for the lungs to function optimally. This reduced muscular strength leads to shallow breathing patterns, which limit the amount of air reaching the lungs and diminish oxygen intake. Over time, this can contribute to a decrease in lung capacity, making breathing more laborious. The effects of a sedentary lifestyle extend to the body's ability to clear out mucus and other particles from the airways. Physical activity helps keep the airways open and encourages deep breathing, which assists in the removal of mucus from the lungs. When this natural clearing process is impaired due to lack of movement, it creates an environment where harmful substances, such as bacteria and viruses, can thrive, increasing the risk of respiratory infections. Conditions like bronchitis or pneumonia become more likely, as the body's first line of defense, the respiratory system, struggles to keep out pathogens. A sedentary lifestyle also affects circulation, which in turn impacts lung health. Poor circulation means less efficient delivery of oxygen to tissues and a slower removal of carbon dioxide, leading to fatigue and shortness of breath during activities that should not normally cause discomfort. As the lungs become less efficient, the heart has to work harder to compensate for the reduced oxygen levels, placing additional strain on the cardiovascular system. Barbara O'Neill suggests that breaking the cycle of inactivity is essential to prevent long-term damage to respiratory health. Chronic mouth breathing, the habit of breathing through the mouth rather than the nose, can have significant negative effects on health and development. One of the immediate problems associated with mouth breathing is a dry mouth. The mouth loses moisture quickly when used for breathing, leading to dehydration of the oral tissues. This dryness reduces the amount of saliva, which plays an essential role in keeping the mouth clean by washing away bacteria and food particles. The absence of enough saliva increases the risk of dental problems, such as tooth decay and gum disease, because harmful bacteria can thrive in a dry environment. Habitually breathing through the mouth also exposes the respiratory system to more airborne irritants, such as dust, pollen, and pollutants. The nose acts as a natural filter, trapping these particles in the mucus lining and preventing them from reaching the lungs. When a person breathes through the mouth, this filtering function is bypassed, which can lead to an increase in respiratory issues, including asthma, allergies, and other breathing difficulties.
Something else very interesting, bronchodilator. What's a bronchodilator? See, dilator means open. Bronchodilator is something that opens the bronchioles, which is very important when someone has chest, particularly asthma. And a powerful bronchodilator is actually carbon dioxide. So someone's having an asthma attack, you know what the best thing they can do is hold their breath. Will they feel like doing that? No. And only nose breathing.
Additionally, mouth breathing can lead to improper oxygen exchange, which may reduce energy levels and affect overall physical well-being. For children, the consequences of mouth breathing extend beyond the respiratory and dental issues. Barbara O'Neill highlights that it can negatively impact facial development. Children who consistently breathe through their mouths may develop a narrower face, smaller jaw, or misaligned teeth. The altered tongue position associated with mouth breathing can also affect the shape of the palate, leading to a higher arch. Over time, these structural changes can contribute to speech difficulties and affect the overall appearance of the face. Poor posture, particularly slouching or hunching over, can significantly impact breathing. When the spine is curved forward, it reduces the space in the chest cavity, limiting the ability of the lungs to expand fully. This restriction leads to shallow breathing, as the diaphragm, the primary muscle involved in respiration, cannot move downward as it should. As a result, less air is drawn into the lungs, reducing oxygen intake, which can affect the body's oxygen levels. Slouching can also compress the abdominal organs, pushing them upward against the diaphragm, making it even harder to take deep breaths. The ribcage is less able to expand outward, which means the lungs can only fill with a limited amount of air. With reduced lung capacity, the body struggles to maintain proper oxygenation, potentially leading to fatigue and decreased mental clarity because the brain and muscles aren't getting the oxygen they need for optimal function. Over time, this can put more strain on the heart, as it works harder to deliver oxygen throughout the body. The effects of poor posture are not limited to reduced lung function. Restricted airflow can also disrupt the body's ability to expel carbon dioxide effectively. As carbon dioxide builds up, it can cause an imbalance in the blood's pH level, leading to symptoms like dizziness, headaches, and shortness of breath. Chronic shallow breathing, resulting from poor posture, can also weaken the respiratory muscles over time, making it even more difficult to breathe deeply. This can create a cycle of ongoing respiratory issues that worsen with age or physical inactivity. Additionally, poor posture can contribute to muscle tension in the neck, shoulders, and back, which can further restrict breathing by limiting the mobility of the chest and diaphragm. Now, excessive alcohol consumption can have serious impacts on lung health.
This metabolite creates a lot of free radicals, and free radicals damage the tissues. This metabolite sometimes creates something 100 times more toxic than it originally was, definitely in the case of alcohol. And you might look at this and say, well, what's the liver doing? It's just created something worse. It's a process. It's like what happens when you clean the kitchen cupboards out. Your kitchen looks 100 times messier than when it started, yeah? It's like when my son put a new clutch in his car. What do you think the garage looked like halfway through? There's stuff everywhere.
When alcohol is consumed heavily, it disrupts the body's natural defense mechanisms, particularly the respiratory system's ability to fend off infections. Alcohol can reduce the function of cilia, the tiny hair-like structures lining the airways that help clear out mucus and harmful particles. When these cilia become less active or damaged, the lungs struggle to expel bacteria and other pathogens, increasing the risk of respiratory infections. This weakened state leaves the lungs more vulnerable to conditions such as pneumonia, which can be severe and harder to recover from in individuals who drink heavily. Alcohol also affects the immune system, diminishing the body's ability to produce enough white blood cells to combat infections. When the immune system is compromised, the lungs can become inflamed more easily, worsening existing respiratory conditions such as asthma. Heavy drinking can lead to more frequent and severe asthma attacks because it aggravates the airways, causing inflammation and swelling that obstructs breathing. Moreover, alcohol can trigger spasms in the bronchial tubes, further complicating asthma management. The harmful effects of alcohol are not just limited to chronic conditions. In cases where heavy drinking leads to intoxication, the risk of aspirating vomit or other substances into the lungs increases significantly. Aspiration can introduce harmful bacteria, leading to aspiration pneumonia, a potentially life-threatening condition. Long-term, excessive alcohol use can even lead to structural changes in the lung tissues, such as fibrosis, which impairs lung elasticity and makes breathing more difficult. The direct toxic effects of alcohol on lung cells also contribute to oxidative stress, promoting cellular damage and weakening lung function over time. Chronic stress also significantly impacts the immune system, weakening its ability to defend against infections. When the body is under stress for extended periods, it releases higher levels of cortisol, a hormone that, while helpful in short-term stress situations, can suppress immune function if constantly elevated. This suppression can lower the body's production of white blood cells, which are essential for fighting off bacteria and viruses. As a result, the body becomes more vulnerable to respiratory infections, which may occur more frequently and with increased severity. Chronic stress also affects the lungs and airways, particularly in individuals with pre-existing conditions like asthma. The stress-induced release of inflammatory chemicals can cause the airways to constrict, leading to worsened asthma symptoms and increased difficulty in breathing. Repeated episodes of stress can trigger more frequent asthma attacks and make them harder to control. This occurs because the body's ongoing stress response keeps the inflammatory pathways activated, reducing the effectiveness of natural mechanisms that usually help to keep inflammation in check. The adverse effects of prolonged stress extend beyond immune suppression and inflammation. It also disrupts the balance of the gut microbiome, which plays a vital role in immune health. Stress alters the composition and function of gut bacteria, reducing the production of protective compounds and increasing the release of toxins that further impair the immune response. This disruption in the gut may not only weaken the body's defense against infections, but also contribute to a heightened allergic response, causing respiratory symptoms to flare up even in the absence of typical triggers. The constant state of stress can lead to shallow breathing patterns, which decrease oxygen intake and further strain the respiratory system. Over time, these changes can contribute to chronic fatigue, leaving the body less resilient to infections and worsening the symptoms of existing respiratory conditions. Inadequate hydration. On top of all, one thing puts the nail in the coffin created by all these problems. That's insufficient water consumption. It plays a role in thickening mucus within the airways. When the body lacks sufficient hydration, mucus loses its natural fluidity, becoming thick and sticky, which obstructs the process of clearing irritants and pathogens. The lungs rely on a continuous flow of thinner mucus to trap and remove dust, bacteria, and other foreign particles. Without enough water, the mucus lining becomes sluggish, trapping these harmful elements inside the respiratory tract instead of expelling them. This thickened mucus can irritate the airways, leading to persistent coughing as the body attempts to clear blockages. Barbara O'Neill also explains that such dehydration can escalate respiratory conditions like asthma, bronchitis, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. In these situations, the mucus production already tends to be high, but without sufficient hydration, it becomes much thicker, further narrowing the airways and making breathing more difficult. Dehydration can also irritate the bronchial tubes, triggering inflammation that can worsen these respiratory symptoms. The lack of moisture can cause the airways to dry out, which further contributes to discomfort and potential irritation. Barbara O'Neill suggests that the issue extends beyond just respiratory problems. Dehydration places added stress on the immune system, making it harder for the body to respond effectively to infections. When mucus is too thick, it hampers the immune cell's ability to reach and neutralize pathogens quickly. This creates a favorable environment for bacteria and viruses to thrive in the lungs, increasing the risk of developing respiratory infections. If dehydration persists over time, it can lead to chronic problems, as constant thickened mucus and irritations may cause lasting damage to the delicate tissues in the respiratory tract. Try to avoid outdoor air pollution as much as you can, because it also affects respiratory health, focusing on pollutants such as particulate matter, ozone, and nitrogen dioxide. These pollutants enter the body through inhalation and can irritate the respiratory tract, causing inflammation in the airways. When the airways are inflamed, it becomes difficult for the body to filter out harmful particles, making individuals more susceptible to respiratory issues. People with pre-existing respiratory conditions such as asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, can experience worsened symptoms due to exposure to these pollutants. The irritation of the airways triggers an inflammatory response that can lead to increased mucus production, making breathing even more challenging for affected individuals. Particulate matter, consisting of tiny particles that can penetrate deep into the lungs, is especially problematic. Once inhaled, these particles can reach the alveoli, where gas exchange occurs, potentially entering the bloodstream and causing systemic effects. This exposure can elevate the risk of lung infections by weakening the lung's defense mechanisms. Ozone, another common pollutant, irritates the airways, causing coughing, throat irritation, and shortness of breath, even in healthy individuals. It can also reduce lung function, making it harder to perform physical activities, particularly in children, the elderly, and those with compromised respiratory health. Nitrogen dioxide, typically produced by vehicle emissions and industrial activities, inflames the lining of the lungs. This inflammation can damage lung tissue over time, making individuals more vulnerable to respiratory infections. Long-term exposure to nitrogen dioxide may not only worsen asthma, but also increase the likelihood of developing conditions such as bronchitis or pneumonia. When these pollutants are combined, they can have a cumulative effect, putting a strain on the respiratory system and making it difficult for the body to recover from everyday exposure. The continuous inhalation of polluted air can weaken the immune system, impairing the body's ability to fight off respiratory infections effectively. Even after that, if you see any early symptoms like a persistent cough, wheezing, or shortness of breath, never ignore them. Otherwise, it can lead to serious respiratory issues. These symptoms often indicate underlying problems, such as asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, or infections like pneumonia. When individuals neglect these warning signs, they risk allowing these conditions to worsen, making them more difficult to treat. For instance, a persistent cough might initially seem minor, but it could signal chronic bronchitis or even lung cancer if left unchecked. Wheezing, characterized by a whistling sound during breathing, can suggest that the airways are constricted or inflamed, commonly seen in asthma or allergic reactions. If wheezing occurs alongside shortness of breath, the situation becomes even more critical. Shortness of breath can stem from various causes, including heart conditions, lung diseases, or even anxiety, and ignoring it can lead to diminished lung function and increased respiratory distress. Early intervention is essential for managing respiratory conditions effectively. Seeking medical advice when experiencing these symptoms can lead to timely diagnosis and treatment. Physicians may recommend lung function tests, such as spirometry, to assess how well the lungs are working. Treatment may include medications like bronchodilators, which help open the airways, or corticosteroids to reduce inflammation. Infections must also be treated promptly. For example, untreated pneumonia can lead to severe complications, including respiratory failure or sepsis. Recognizing the seriousness of these symptoms can help prevent the progression of disease. Regular checkups with healthcare providers allow for monitoring lung health, especially for individuals with a history of respiratory problems or those exposed to pollutants. Maintaining a smoke-free environment and minimizing exposure to irritants can support lung health. Lifestyle modifications, such as a balanced diet, rich in antioxidants and regular physical activity, also play a crucial role in maintaining respiratory function. Awareness and timely action regarding these early symptoms are vital for preserving lung health and preventing long-term complications. So, which of these habits do you have already? Have you tried to stop any of them? Let us know in the comments. While it's extremely important to stop these habits to protect your health, you should also know some of the best exercises to perfect your breathing and take care of your health. And that's why you need to complete the full circle of knowledge, which I have broken into these 2 detailed videos. Just click and watch them one by one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insights into maintaining your health. Stay healthy,